Greetings to one and all present here. I am Dr. L. Santhosh Kumar, Assistant Professor of English at Kristu Jayanti College, Autonomous, Bengaluru, Karnataka, India. And I am here to deliberate on the topic Testimonio and Gender Studies. And it is my quiet and humble duty to introduce about the topic to you at the first phase. And when we talk about the term Testimonio and Gender Studies, it is quite pretty sure that the idea of literature or the meaning of literature is being redefined in the contemporary times. And literature in the contemporary times is being defined as culture-specific production, whereas in the good old past, people define literature as mirror of life, age of life, or reflection of life. Whereas in the contemporary times, that too, after the advent of cultural studies, the gap between the anthropologists and the humanistic scholars have been bridged. So, thus begins the interdisciplinary approach to knowledge. And cultural studies is said to be a broad and a comprehensive term which includes literature, anthropology, economics, politics, social sciences, and so on. And the beauty of cultural studies is that it has made the element of literariness and literary text to be autotelic. And most importantly, we all of us talk about the unity in a text, or we talk about the autonomy in a text. And for all those things, we are supposed to be thankful to the element called cultural studies. And under that particular label, we have got different variety of genres which talk about some unique aspects of literature. And under that, today, we will be discussing on the topic Testimonio and Gender Studies. And when we look at the term Testimonio, testimonial literature is being derived from the word testimonio, which means witness narrative. And most importantly, it had its origin in the Latin America, where the women in the Latin America, they protested against the patriarchal norms of the government. And most importantly, in the good old past, that is in the 13th and 14th century, testimonio was considered as one of the tools for feminist movements. And most importantly, people at that time, they misinterpreted the fact by saying that it is a movement which is primarily meant for gender studies, or it's primarily meant for gendered movements. And later, as years passed by, there were so many critics and so many stalwarts who started to talk about the element of testimonio to a greater extent. And when we talk about testimonio, what does it indicate, or what does want to infer to society? The word testimonio means witness narrative. And we have got so many renowned scholars to define this particular term. And one such person is John Beverley. And in his work titled The Politics of Truth, he has mentioned that the best way to learn subaltern is through testimonios. And there's also another critic called George Gugelberger, who has mentioned by saying that a testimonialista can explain his or her own personal testimony directly by addressing a specific interlocutor. And another famous critic called a person called Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, she has contested the fact by saying that the idea behind learning, the idea in defining testimonios is becoming too complex because it talks about the idea of questioning the falsified histories and falsified truths. And next, most importantly, when we talk about gender studies and testimonio, what does it derive, or what does want to convey to the society? And when we talk about the term gender studies in the contemporary times is revamping the idea of literature. And most importantly, gender studies in the contemporary times, it doesn't address a particular label, or it doesn't talk about an individual entity. It talks about what are all the issues pertaining to irrespective of all genders. It can be identity crisis, it can be a stereotypical representation, and most importantly, it can also be the voices of the unheard. The problem in the contemporary times is that unheard voices are not being recorded properly. Even though they are being recorded, they are being manipulated by the power structures. And the reason why they are being manipulated by the power structures is that it is all because of the impact of political monopolization. And gender studies in the contemporary times is no more representing. It is just representation. And when we talk about the idea of representation, what we are supposed to do, or what we are supposed to talk about here is that the idea of an single entity. And most importantly, when we talk about the ambiguity of a particular problem, or when we talk about the idea behind different gendered perspectives, and also at the same time, in the contemporary times, people like so many pioneers of gender studies, they started to draw a line between personal and political. And when all these voices and when all their arguments are being questioned or when they are being debated, by default, the idea of authenticity comes into existence. Now, in the contemporary times, we often ask a question to each and every sensible person, whether they belong to academia or non-academia. The question is that how authentic is authenticity? Whether the ideas or the histories presented by you, does they derive the exact meaning which the people wanted to do? And all those queries or all those representations are being represented in the idea under the label of gender studies. And when we talk about testimonio, in the contemporary times, it questions the veracity of original truths. And you might ask, how does we define truth? And to define truth, we are supposed to go back from the time of Francis Bacon, who has written an essay called Of Truth. In that he has asked, what is truth? Suggesting Pilate. And now in the contemporary times, the idea or the concept of truth is something being debatable, and sometimes it is also being apolitical. The reason why it is being apolitical is that literature had spread its wings. Literature had spread its wings all over the binaries. And most importantly, it questions the authenticity of a particular issue. And most importantly, testimonio, in the contemporary times, it makes each and every person in the academia to think about the authenticity of facts. And testimonio, in general, in the contemporary times, it challenges historians, history books, and most importantly, historiographies. It is a well-known fact that history books, right from the good old past, they had spoken only about the importance of an individual, whereas in the contemporary times, the concept of defining history is something being reinterpreted. It is not being reinforced, it is being reinterpreted, and most importantly, the idea of individualism doesn't exist in the present history books and historiographies. And when we talk about historiography, what do you mean by historiography? The term historiography clearly indicates that a creation of a history of a particular space. Sometimes it can be topographical, sometimes it can be written, sometimes it can be in a form of oral traditions. And another most important thing with testimonio, with reference to gender studies, is that testimonio, it talks about the importance of oral traditions. How it talks about the importance of oral traditions, and if people ask us, if we want to know about the impact of oral traditions, we all of us should remember one important aspect. That is, there is a particular voice in India or particular voice throughout the globe which is being unrecognized or which is being muted for a very long time. The reason why they're being muted for a very long time is that they have got a rich legacy, and that legacy paves way for a powerful history, and through their powerful histories, none can destroy or destruct or deconstruct them. And who are they? Those people are none other than the tribal communities of India. So, as we see in this particular slide, traversing the unearthed truths, testimonio with the help of gender studies is making each and every one of us to ravel the unheard mysteries. Those unheard mysteries are other than the unheard voices or untold voices. And the reason why they are being untold or unheard is that they were not given the element of autonomy. They were not given the idea of expression. They were not given the idea of contest a particular fact. So, in the contemporary times, all these elements are being taken into consideration. And next, when we look at it, the evolution of testimonio and gender studies, it's quite chronological, and most importantly, it has got some strong interdisciplinarity. And people often talk about the idea of Barry Commoner, a renowned ecologist who has uttered a famous statement that everything is connected to everything else. Whereas in the contemporary times, Barry Commoner's philosophy has becoming transdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. And most importantly, each and every research which is being done on the label of Testimonio and gender studies is being debated to a greater extent. The more it is being debated, the more it is being questioned. And more it is being questioned, by default, the falsified truths are on the verge of extinction. And there lies the success. And Testimonio and gender studies, they have one thing in common. The common unifying phenomenon is none other than the importance or the impact of oral traditions. And what do oral traditions derive, or what do they indicate? The idea of oral traditions, it clearly indicates that the histories which were existing or which existed, which are existing, I just wanted to put it in three phases of tense: which were existing, which existed, and which are existing. All these ideas or all these historiographies which are not being written, that is the most painful fact in Testimonio. All these arguments or all these structures were not being written, but they were being preserved in the form of oral traditions. And oral traditions is not only passing through a word of mouth, it is all protecting and preserving it by the successful predecessors. And Testimonio and gender studies, the one common connect apart from oral traditions is that they give importance for women-centric approaches. When it comes to tribal discourses, the idea of matriarchy is something being given importance. And most importantly, in tribal discourses, women are said to be the custodians of culture. Whereas in the entire Indian context, it is only the women folks who are given this particular label, whereas in the tribal scenario, it's only the women folks who are given much preference. They are said to be the primordial pillars of their structure, and they are said to be the custodians of a particular culture, and they uphold it. And most importantly, in tribal scenario, each and every birth of a tribal is something being closely connected with the natural landscapes and with the natural reservoirs. There's a particular group of tribe called Jaghawat tribes. And this particular tribal community is from Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And this particular tribal community, they believe that their birth is from an elephant. And the reason behind that is that elephant trunk is not supposed to be exploited. When it is being exploited for materialistic purpose, it is a clear-cut understanding that these Jaghawat tribes, as per their traditional beliefs, it is an indication that their race is on the verge of extinction. And all these ideas were being preached to them through the women in the family, that too through oral traditions. And there is another set of tribes, they are from Bangladesh. And this particular tribal community, they believe that their birth is from water. And if any reservoir or if any riverbed is being exploited for someone's welfare, and most importantly, Testimonio and gender studies, they also make us to understand the importance of riverbeds and rivers. It's a well-known fact that riverbeds are said to be the cradles of civilization. And when they all talk about the nuances or the impact of a particular river, and most importantly, from a literature background, we all know the importance of river Thames, which had been spoken from the times of Chaucer. And river Thames had been interpreted as per different writers. For a Chaucer and for poet like Edmund Spenser, it is something a quite memorable phenomenon. For a poet like T.S. Eliot, river Thames is said to be something a very strange and a very sad phenomenon. Same thing if you look at the riverbed at Congo, River Congo in the African region, for those people, it is said to be a celebration of efficacy of a particular culture. And same thing in a country like India, each and every state has got a particular riverbed and where we celebrate the legacies. And it is a well-known fact that most of the histories, most of the cultures were being derived only on the origins of riverbeds. And even the flow of a riverbed, it indicates the flow or the movement of a particular nation's history, which is being identified or defined by women folks. And all these efficacies or all these ideologies pertaining to gender studies in the contemporary times are being brought to us through Testimonio. So this is how Testimonio and gender studies, they have evolved together. And next most important thing, when we talk about why Testimonio and gender studies are being important in the contemporary times. In the contemporary times, they are being important because they, by default, they talk about the originality. And in the contemporary times, the word manipulation has become a default one with all sort of people, whether they are a historian, whether they are an academician, or whether they are a people who uphold a particular culture. The process of cultural assimilation is becoming quite painful. Even though it is painful, it is becoming an everyday practice. And Testimonio and gender studies, they put an end for it. They often ensure that the natives who are supposed to uphold a particular culture, they're not supposed to give up on it. And the more they give up on it, by default, it talks about the extinction that they themselves are giving up on their own race. All these structures and all these marginalities or marginal efficacies need to be addressed. The more they address, the more they talk about the importance of originality. Originality is something which the academia is being looking upon. And another most important thing, the impact of cultural studies has made the researcher come student or student come researcher to explore the territories of literature or literariness beyond a text. Gone are those days where people believed that literature confined itself only to books. And one more thing I just wanted to record here through Testimony and Gender Studies is that it is only books which are said to be the repository of cultures which will keep the wounds alive. And more than that, now the painting, the portrayal, or the podcast, they are all emerging as a powerful literary text which talks about the identity of resistance, which talks about the nuances of resistance. And for gender studies and testimonial, we have podcasts in millions and trillions. And we have a different painting, a caricatures. From the good old past, we had caricatures. Now we have different sort of representations in social media platforms and even in different varieties. So, testimonial and gender studies in the contemporary times, they question the authenticity. The more they question, we, each and every one of us, will be knowing about how history and truths were being manipulated by the power structures owing to political monopolization. Thank you. And I just wanted to conclude by saying that the more we learn history, the more we know about gender studies and testimonial, and it is quite quintessential for all of us to know about the originality of truths so that falsified truths and falsified histories are buried and the original truths will be embraced forever. Thank you.